WTOC and the Georgia Gray television stations present Republican incumbent David Perdue and Democratic challenger Jon Ossoff in the 2020 Georgia U.S. senatorial debate. Now, here's your moderator, Mike Cihla.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Mike Cihla. WTOC is hosting a debate for Georgia's U.S. senatorial race with candidates, Republican incumbent David Perdue and Democratic challenger Jon Ossoff. In addition to WTOC here in Savannah, this debate is also airing on WRDW in Augusta, WTVM in Columbus, WALB in Albany, WCTV in Thomasville. The candidates are 8 feet apart, and as you can see, there is a plexiglass divider between them. We are following CDC recommendations. Here are the rules for tonight's debate. Candidates will have 1 minute and 30 seconds for opening and closing statements. The candidates will have 1 minute and 15 seconds to answer a question when a question is posed to both. The candidates can request a rebuttal if they are named or attacked by the other candidate in their answer. If that request is granted, the candidate will have 45 seconds for a rebuttal response. We also have directed questions for the individual candidates. They will have 1 minute and 15 seconds for a response. The other candidate will have 45 seconds for comment if they choose to. Then rebuttal rules about a direct attack would go into effect. Again, the candidates tonight are Republican incumbent David Perdue and Democratic challenger Jon Ossoff. You both have 1 minute and 30 seconds for opening statements. Senator Perdue, you won the coin flip, so let's start with you.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you to WTOC for hosting this tonight. You know, my mom and dad were public school teachers in Middle Georgia. I grew up working on our family farms. I worked my way through Georgia Tech and went on to have a business career and became a Fortune 500 CEO and created tens of thousands of American jobs. I never wanted to be in politics. But when Bonnie and I decided to get involved, we wanted to try to help change the direction of the country and get real results for Georgia. And from deepening the port, to rebuilding our military, to disaster relief for our farmers, to help for Plant Vogel right here in this area, to also getting real COVID relief during the crisis. I think we've done just that. In contrast, Jon Ossoff has said that he's always wanted to be in politics. He's pushing a radical socialist agenda. He'll be nothing but a rubber stamp to Chuck Schumer. And he says one thing in Atlanta and another in the rest of Georgia. If you believe me, if you look at what he has said in the past, you can see that that's evidently the truth. Tonight, listen to his words. He will not tell you why he wants to support defunding the police, open borders, sanctuary cities, or why he wants to close 2 military bases in the state of Georgia, or why he thinks it's a good idea to take away our private health insurance from our own employers. The only reason that Bonnie and I are running for re-election is to continue to help change the direction of the country and get real results for Georgia.
All right, thank you, Mr. Perdue. Mr. Ossoff, you now have 1 minute 30 for your opening statement.
Well, typical partisan false accusations from the senator, but listening to the senator's opening statement, here with this opportunity to address the people of this state about the direction of leadership for this state, you would not know, listening to Senator Perdue, that we are in the midst of a pandemic that has taken nearly 250,000 American lives. Senator Perdue, in his opening remarks, has not even acknowledged that we are in the midst of a crisis that has touched every family. We've lost parents, grandparents, neighbors. So many have been forced out of work. So many lives have been uprooted. We long for normalcy. We long for leaders who are honest with us about threats to our health at a moment when so many of us need government that serves us by empowering public health experts, medical doctors, and scientists to lead the public health response in a public health crisis. This virus that is accelerating across our country, hospitalizations increasing, nearly 1,000 Americans dying per day, was dismissed by Senator David Perdue as no deadlier than the ordinary flu. He told us the risk to our health was low. He told us the impact on our economy would be little. And this evening, you're going to hear David Perdue talk about everything but this crisis that has torn this country apart. He will seek to deflect and distract with false accusations, but he won't acknowledge the devastation that's still being wreaked across this country or present a plan to contain this virus.
Thank you, Mr. Perdue, or Mr. Ossoff there. Thank you both for being here tonight, Mr. Perdue and Mr. Ossoff. It is our hope and our expectation that you can show voters in Georgia and our families an example of what civil discourse looks like and how to engage in passionate yet respectful debate. But thank you both in advance of that. We are joined by a live panel who will ask questions tonight. That panel is made up of journalists from WTOC sister stations that serve viewers all across Georgia. That panel includes Dawn Baker, evening anchor at WTOC in Savannah, Barbara Gauthier, an evening anchor at WTVM in Columbus, Richard Rogers, evening anchor at WRDW in Augusta, Edan Schultz, anchor and managing editor at WCTV in Tallahassee, and Jim Wallace, anchor at WALB in Albany. We want to go for our first question. Let's go to Dawn Baker with WTOC.
Good evening, gentlemen. The first question goes to both of our candidates. Despite America having far more time to prepare than China and Europe for the coronavirus, the COVID-19 virus has taken an even greater toll on our nation. What is your analysis of America's response and having the advantage now to be able to look back on what has happened and see how serious this virus can be? Would you change anything about how the country responded?
Mr. Ossoff, to you.
Well, protecting the American people in a public health emergency such as this is a core function of our government. And nurses and doctors like my wife Alicia, an OBGYN who practices medicine in Metro Atlanta, they've been doing their jobs to save lives and keep people safe. The epidemiologists and scientists who know what they're doing in a crisis like this have been giving their best advice to our political leaders to save lives and control the spread of this virus. But Senator David Perdue and others in Washington systematically ignored, downplayed, and dismissed the best medical expertise. Again, Senator David Perdue insisted to us that this virus was no deadlier than the ordinary flu. What we need to do is empower public health experts and medical experts to lead on the response. And we have to do it now, because this virus is not going away. It is accelerating into the winter months. It's killed nearly 250,000 Americans, and we will lose hundreds of thousands more unless our political leaders step up, stop politicizing and downplaying the response, and let the public health experts lead to keep us healthy, safe, and contain this virus.
Senator Perdue, you have a minute 15.
Thank you, Mike. Well, again, we hear the idle comments that we've heard before. Almost 8,000 people in the state of Georgia now. These are tragedies. We all know them. These are friends of ours, sometimes relatives. This has been a tragedy of immeasurable proportion. It's easy to look back as the question goes on, but one of the things that we have to recognize in this virus is the early responsibility. Clearly, China was responsible for this, and we've learned a lot about the virus, who's most vulnerable, what we need to do to protect them, and so forth. But what we have to do is hold China accountable, and Jon Ossoff will not be the one to do that, because in the last 2 years, he's actually been working for a company owned by the Communist Chinese government. And yet in the last debate, he denied that. So the question tonight is, moving forward, instead of looking back, what we've learned is that we've got to get a vaccine, we've got to accelerate, and we've done this, we've put a lot of money behind this, accelerating the treatment regimens and so forth, and get the money back into the state. The Democrats right now are blocking the aid that we want to bring back to the states in addition to what we've already done.
All right. Mr. Ossoff, you were named in that, so you get a rebuttal.
Blaming the Democrats, blaming foreign countries. How about taking some personal responsibility? Senator David Perdue told us this virus was no deadlier than the ordinary flu. Senator, everybody has been able to watch in real time as this president, this administration, and his allies have systematically misled the people about the threat to our health. Take some personal responsibility for what the whole country and the whole world can see is an abject failure of governance. Step up, acknowledge what's been done wrong, and chart a course forward. Empower the medical experts. Put the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, based here in Atlanta, in charge. Let the public health experts lead, not the politicians.
Mr. Perdue.
Well, again, he didn't answer the question or the issue. And the real issue is, did he work for a company for 2 years and failed to tell the people of Georgia about it in his primary filing, and then turn around and amended it later? Did he work for that company or not? And will he hold China accountable? He's not issued that response tonight. In the first debate, he acknowledged that he did not work for them. And so let's take personal responsibility, as you say. Let's step up, John. Did you or not, did you work for that Chinese communist company? PCCW is a media company in Hong Kong that's owned by China Unicom, and owned by the Chinese government. So the question is, for the last 2 years, he's been working on them. That's on top of working for Al Jazeera for the last decade.
Mr. Ossoff, I'll let you answer that, and then we'll move on to the next question.
As I predicted, Senator Perdue doesn't want to talk about COVID-19, a pandemic that has killed nearly 250,000 Americans. He is going to spend this entire debate deflecting from a substantive conversation about the most serious public health crisis in generations. He will launch false attacks, he'll make outlandish allegations, he'll repeat the same 6 words over and over and over again because it's what his handlers in Washington have trained him to do, to evade responsibility and avoid a substantive discussion of where we go forward now to contain this virus. And here's the answer. We put the medical experts and public health experts in charge, not failed and disgraced politicians like David Perdue.
Thank you for your time. We're going to move on to the next question.
I think I get a response. He named me in that answer.
Very quickly.
Well, again, he talks about taking responsibility, but he won't do that. He misled the people of Georgia in the primary. This is really important here because it goes to trust and judgment. If you want somebody to represent you in the United States Senate, you better hope they have good judgment and that you can trust them. He misled everybody in the primary. He then refiled after the primary was over and is now told the legal document that he filed says that he indeed worked for that company, even though before, in our last debate, he said he did not. And if that's confusing, go to my website, PerdueSenate.com, and you'll get that cleared up and you'll see why he's not wanting to answer the question and why he won't take his own advice about taking responsibility.
We're going to move on to our next question. Let's go to Edan Schultz with WCTV.
Good evening from South Georgia. This question is for both candidates as well, and we want to get back to the pandemic. It's been hard to balance the health and safety concerns with the economic impacts. So what do you say to businesses and workers that are struggling? They need to get back to normal because their livelihood is at stake.
Senator Perdue, you have 1:15.
Thank you, Mike. That's a great question because right now my answer would be to call every Democrat because they're the ones blocking the next round of aid for our CARES Act. I mean, we put $2.9 trillion at work. We brought $47 billion here to Georgia, $7 billion for our hospitals and healthcare workers that needed it desperately. Another $15 billion for a PPP program that saved 1.5 million jobs in this state. And yet Jon Ossoff opposed the PPP program and still does. He would have voted against that. And as a matter of fact, right now in the United States Senate, we have bills waiting to go on the floor to be debated and amended that the Democrats are blocking that would bring more aid. We need a couple of months of immediate help for these smallest companies that average $103,000 per loan in the state and only 10 employees. Friendly's Restaurant in Valdosta, Maritza in McDonough. These are people that would have lost their business and we saved 1.5 million jobs. He would have voted against it because he would be nothing but a rubber stamp for Chuck Schumer. And the reason I'm talking about the same words is that he does it all the time, and that is he's saying things that will disclose or that will disguise his real radical socialist agenda.
Mr. Ossoff, you now have 1:15.
Well, it's nonsense. I've been advocating for months now for renewal and growth of the PPP small business lending program, which Senator Perdue allowed to expire in August. Listen to his answers. It's always the other party's fault. It's always somebody else's fault. No sense of personal responsibility. Let's talk about who's hurting right now, because it's not Senator Perdue's donors. It's the corner mechanic, mom and pop small businesses, local restaurants, working parents who sit around the kitchen table and can't figure out how they're going to afford the house payment and the car payment and their health care because one of them's out of work. The Senate has not delivered relief for Georgia families, for small businesses, since August. They've been rushing through a Supreme Court nominee who they hope will help them overturn the Affordable Care Act and repeal protections for pre-existing conditions. That's Senator Perdue's priority right now, not financial relief for ordinary people. Senator Perdue has been hard at work pushing through a judge in hopes that she will rule on a lawsuit he supports to rip health care away from Georgia families in the middle of a pandemic, and he voted 4 times to repeal protections for pre-existing conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Ossoff.
I think I get a response.
You do get a rebuttal.
Thank you,
45 seconds.
You know, John, I'm proud of the fact that we voted Amy Coney Barrett in as the 9th Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Had he been there, he would have voted against her, just like every single Democrat did this week on Monday night at 8 o'clock. That's why I say he will be nothing but a rubber stamp for Chuck Schumer. If you want results up there, you need somebody that's going to go up there and focus on the people of Georgia. He mentioned donors right out of the gate. Well, nine of the $10 that he's raised in the third quarter came from outside the state of Georgia. Who's he going to be accountable to? The people of Georgia or the people in California and New York who are funding this race for him?
Mr. Ossoff, you have 45 seconds.
Well, the question was about economic relief for the people of the state. And Senator, you're right. Let's talk about results. Where are the results? Can you answer that question, Senator?
Absolutely.
Without blaming the other political party?
Absolutely.
Where since August? Look, I was speaking to a young woman the other day who just started a car parking business near Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. She was just getting this business off the ground, making good money, beginning to save for her and her family's future. She is now out of work. Her business is gone. She can't make the car payment. She can't make the house payment. She fears homelessness, and she can't get PPP relief because you let it expire months ago and turned your attention to a judicial process that you hope will repeal the Affordable Care Act.
I get to respond to that. The reason it expired, John, is that your compatriots up there, the Democrats, would not engage in an active, well, that's the truth. You want the truth? There it is. Let's take accountability. We have put bill after bill on that floor that would give additional aid to PPP right now. That could have happened in July, John, and you guys voted it down every single time. We also voted for a judge. There's no doubt about that, but that was our responsibility. Had you been there, you would have voted against Amy Coney Barrett. That's clear. But what's happening right now is that on the other side of that, we had people like Maritza, an Ecuadorian national that is now a U.S. citizen, saved her business, 20-something employees right there in McDonough. Friendly's restaurant will tell you they would have lost that business without that PPP help. Right now, we need both parties in Washington to come together and get this next round of relief done.
Thank you, Senator Perdue. Let's move on to our next question. Let's go to Barbara Gauthier with WTVM out of Columbus.
And good evening, gentlemen. And on behalf of your constituents in Columbus and the Chattahoochee Valley, I'd like to welcome you. Thank you for answering our questions. My question is for both candidates. Healthcare is a key issue, especially in a pandemic. Tell us how you plan to ensure that everyone, regardless of income, job, or pre-existing condition, has access to necessary health care.
Minute 15 to Mr. Ossoff.
Well, this is the most important issue in the midst of this public health crisis. How can we ensure that every single Georgia family has the great health insurance that they need and deserve at a price they can afford? I mentioned my wife Alicia is a doctor, an OBGYN. She and her colleagues across this state see every day how many Georgia families struggle to afford health care. It is a source of constant stress for so many Georgia families. The outrageous insurance premiums, the outrageous cost of prescription drugs. And now, in the middle of a pandemic that is worsening, a pandemic that Senator Perdue told us would be no deadlier than the ordinary flu, in the middle of this historic public health crisis, Senator Perdue is still supporting a lawsuit to repeal the Affordable Care Act, to repeal protections for Georgians with pre-existing conditions. That means those of us who have asthma, or diabetes, or heart disease, or family members recovering from cancer, they would stand to lose their health policies or be denied coverage if Senator Perdue has his way. It's wrong, Senator, and you should put Georgia families ahead of the insurance companies you work for.
Thank you for your time, Senator Perdue.
First of all, I've never worked for an insurance company, but let's talk about accountability and responsibility. The reason part of this is in such a mess, ladies and gentlemen, and we all know it, is before the Affordable Care Act. In Georgia, half of the counties in our state are now limited to one health care insurance provider. Look, we have a bill before the Senate, I co-sponsored it, that would give us protection against pre-existing conditions in the event that the Affordable Care Act is indeed determined by the Supreme Court to be unconstitutional. The other thing is we got to do is work on surprise billing and drug costs. He talks about drug companies and so forth, but that's also a trade issue. We've been working on that. There are solutions to be had there. What I come back to, though, in the middle of this pandemic is we've got to hold accountable the people that helped create this pandemic, and that's the country of China. Communist China today is one of our biggest threats. This man worked for him for 2 years, and we've heard it already. He is now not acknowledging that he worked for that company. In the last debate, he said absolutely not. But I'm here to tell you that there is a document, and I have it right here. This is his July filing where he disclosed to the federal government that he in fact did work for them. Now there's a responsibility here he needs to own up to, because sooner or later we need somebody in the United States Senate that will stand up to Communist China.
Thank you, Senator Perdue. Mr. Ossoff.
This is so beneath the office of a U.S. Senator. You've continued to demean yourself throughout this campaign with your conduct. First, you were lengthening my nose in attack ads to remind everybody that I'm Jewish. Then when that didn't work, you started calling me some kind of Islamic terrorist. And then when that didn't work, you started calling me a Chinese communist. It's ridiculous. And you shouldn't do everything that your handlers in Washington tell you to, because you'll lose your soul along the way, Senator. What the people of Georgia deserve is a serious discussion of economic relief for Georgia families and how we're going to protect coverage for pre-existing conditions.
Thank you for your time. Senator Perdue, yes.
No, John, what Georgia needs is a senator that won't lie to them and that won't work for Al Jazeera, the mouthpiece of terrorism, and Communist China.
All right, let's move on to our next question. Let's go to Jim Wallace from WALB in Albany, Georgia.
Gentlemen, you both say you support the Second Amendment. Mr. Perdue, you say that you would like to enforce current firearm laws. Mr. Ossoff, you say in your policy statement that you support banning the sale of semi-automatic weapons with italics marks around assault rifles. Can you both explain your stance on gun laws and curbing gun violence in America?
Senator Perdue, a minute 15 to you.
Thank you. Well, it's a seminal question today. Thank you. First of all, I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe in the First Amendment. The NRA has given me an A rating. They've given Jon Ossoff an F rating. There's a reason for that. He says one thing out here, and you'll hear in just a minute, while he's all for, the Second Amendment. He wants to protect our rights. But to his Bloomberg buddies up in Washington and California and New York and in Atlanta, he says something totally different.
Mr. Ossoff, minute 15 to you.
Well, look, we have to uphold and defend the Second Amendment while also passing substantive gun safety reforms. And that's exactly what I'll do in the U.S. Senate. Look, I've purchased and owned firearms in Georgia. And like most gun owners in this state, what I recognize is that guns are lethal and dangerous tools. They're not toys. And we need gun safety measures to protect Georgia families from gun violence. I will never forget, when I was 12 years old, the night before the last day of school, one of our teachers, Carlton, was gunned down in Atlanta, Georgia. So many Georgia families have been touched by gun violence. Senator Perdue voted against a bill to require a simple, universal criminal background check for firearms purchases. Senator Perdue is not working for responsible gun owners. Senator Perdue is working for the firearms manufacturing industry. That's who butters his bread. That's who he votes for. Not those of us in this state who would purchase and own and operate and store firearms in a safe manner, but gun manufacturers whose sole objective is to move as many weapons onto our streets as possible, even though it doesn't just put families at risk, it puts law enforcement at risk, it puts our entire state at risk when there is the uncontrolled flow of weapons of war onto our streets.
That is your time, Mr. Ossoff. Senator Perdue.
Well, I'm glad to know that you're finally concerned about our men in blue. When you stand on the streets of an Abolish the Police rally and you back them up and then come down here and say you want to support the police, it's one reason why 13 Democratic sheriffs, these are Democrat sheriffs, democratically elected sheriffs, have endorsed me, and almost 100 sheriffs across our state, because they know I'll have their back. The Fraternal Order of Police has done the same thing. Gun violence is a tragedy. We just saw this week where Atlanta, Georgia now has the same murder rate as Chicago. Chicago has the most onerous gun laws in the country. So it's obviously a much bigger issue, and we have to deal with that. But not supporting the police is a part of the problem in Atlanta.
All right, thank you, Senator Perdue. Right now, we do want to take a 3-minute commercial break. Make sure to join us when we return. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Mike Cihla. We are now going to start the second half of our debate with Georgia's U.S. Senate candidates, Republican incumbent David Perdue and Democratic challenger Jon Ossoff. And in this section, the questions will be more directed to one candidate. Now, the other candidate will get 45 seconds after that to respond if they choose to. Right now, we want to go to our first question. Let's go to Edan Schultz with WCTV.
Yeah, this question is for Mr. Ossoff. In the wake of George Floyd's death and the Black Lives Matter protests, you said funding for police departments needs to be, quote, on the line. What did you mean by that? Isn't that defunding the police? And how do you balance public safety and police accountability?
Mr. Ossoff, a minute 15 to you.
Thank you for the question. And no, absolutely, it's not defunding the police. What it is ensuring that local departments that apply for federal grants are held to high standards in terms of constitutional and civil rights. Look, we have to be honest about the need for criminal justice reform in this country. The 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution guarantees equal protection under the law for every citizen. But when a young black man named Ahmaud Arbery is shot to death in broad daylight on camera in the middle of the street, and local law enforcement and prosecutors look the other way, that makes a mockery of equal protection under the law. My first exposure to public service was working for Congressman John Lewis, a man who dedicated his life to championing civil rights. And what we need in this country now is a new Civil Rights Act and leaders who will take that on. But you know, after Ahmaud Arbery was killed, the NAACP held a peaceful march for criminal justice reform, and I was there with hundreds of others. And so was Bishop Jackson of the AME Church. And what he told me that day was that he had invited Senator Perdue to come and address the people. Not only Senator Perdue didn't come, he didn't even respond to the invitation.
Thank you, Mr. Ossoff. Senator Perdue, 45 seconds.
Well, again, he projects onto me what you just heard there, and that is he really doesn't address the real issue. The real issue is he says one thing in Atlanta, in an Abolish the Police rally. It's on tape. You can see it on YouTube. It's there for everybody to see. That's what's so ironic about this. He'll say and do anything to hide this radical socialist agenda that the Democrats are trying to perpetrate right now. And this is a perfect example. But now that sounds almost very reasonable, what he just said. But can you see him standing in an Abolish the Police rally making those same comments? No, because he did not do that. That's the hypocrisy that people back here are sick about. As an outsider of this process, that's what I'm sick about.
All right, thank you both. We now want to go to our next question to Barbara Gauthier with WTVM out of Columbus, Georgia.
Thank you. This question is for Senator Perdue. You mispronounced VP candidate and Senator Kamala Harris's name and made light of it in Macon 2 weeks ago. Others have claimed it was intentional. What is your response to those claims?
Senator Perdue?
Thank you, Mike. Well, I absolutely meant no disrespect. I've said that publicly to Senator Harris. What I was talking about, and what I'm trying to do, is educate the people of Georgia about what's trying to be perpetrated here, and that is this radical socialist agenda that Jon Ossoff will clearly just be a rubber stamp for Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi as they perpetrate this outrageous agenda on our country. Well, what's in that? What did they not talk about? Defunding the police? You heard the double talk just then. Well, what about open borders? They talk about that when they're in their enclave, when they're handlers. They talk about sanctuary cities. They want to close 2 military bases. In 2017, he ran on the proposition of joint basing, which would close 2 bases in Georgia. And he thinks it's a good idea, just like the Democrats do, to take away our private health care insurance from our employers. That's 180 million people that would lose their health insurance and be poured onto Medicare, and would endanger Medicare in a way that we cannot imagine today. This is the most dangerous thing they're talking about. And this is that radical socialist agenda that I'm trying to warn Georgians about.
Thank you, Senator Perdue. We want to go to Mr. Ossoff. Rebuttal rules kicked in after you were named.
He keeps repeating the same words over and over again. Again, this is what they train them to do up in Washington. But what he doesn't want to address is this pandemic, how wrong he was, how deeply he misled us, telling us this would be no worse than the ordinary flu, and now how he is working day and night to rip health care away from his own constituents in the middle of a pandemic. Senator, you voted 4 times to to repeal protections for Georgians with pre-existing conditions so that your own constituents with diabetes or asthma or heart disease could be denied health coverage by an insurance company? Why don't you own up for those votes and apologize to the people you represent?
Mike, I think you have to respond to that.
Yes, absolutely. 45 seconds.
I voted against the Obamacare Affordable Care Act. It had it in there. But we also voted, what you're not telling them is the rest of the story, which you have a habit of doing, is that we also voted several times to get pre-existing protection. We have a bill in there right now that the Democrats are blocking that would protect pre-existing conditions in the event that the Supreme Court judges it to be unconstitutional. But this is the type of prevarication that you're getting from someone who has always wanted to be a career politician.
Mr. Ossoff.
The bill that you sponsored, the PROTECT Act, has carve-outs that specifically allow insurance companies to deny coverage for pre-existing conditions. You have been called out repeatedly by independent fact-checkers for lying about your record on this. You've taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from insurance companies, and then you go and do their bidding in Washington. You voted 4 times to repeal protections for pre-existing conditions. You sponsored a bill called the PROTECT Act to protect insurance industry profits by carving out loopholes to allow them to deny coverage to Georgia families with pre-existing conditions. Take some responsibility for your record for once, Senator. Don't just blame the other side. Acknowledge your voting record. Acknowledge that the truth is you're trying to take health care away from people in a pandemic.
You get a response very quickly.
My responsibility to people in Georgia is to make sure they have health coverage and they have health insurance. What the Affordable Care Act did was it removed the options and increased costs. Where does all this come from? It comes from the Affordable Care Act that everybody's beating their chest about. It's been so great. Well, it's caused us to lose insurance, and over half of our counties in the state of Georgia are limited to one insurance carrier. I was a part of that. I had a private insurance policy when they did the Affordable Care Act, and I lost it. I had to have a coverage that doubled my rates. I was an individual. And so this is what people in Georgia are suffering through right now. And what they want is protection for pre-existing conditions, get rid of surprise billing, which we can do, and also get at drug costs. He's talking about politics. We're talking about real potential solutions.
Mr. Ossoff.
Once again, Senator, you voted 4 times to repeal protections for pre-existing conditions. Then you spent millions of dollars running ads across Georgia, telling people you did the opposite. PolitiFact, an independent fact-checking website, found your ads flatly false. It's hard to get them to find something just flatly false. You've been lying through your teeth about your record on health care. You sponsored legislation called the PROTECT Act that everybody knows, and everybody at home watching knows, has loopholes for insurance companies to deny us care in the event we have a pre-existing condition. You should apologize for voting to repeal vital health care protections and continuing that policy in the middle of a pandemic. Apologize, sir.
Do I get to respond to that?
I'll give you very quickly.
Yeah, thank you. John, you know, you can talk those idle words all night long, but the fact is that we have indeed voted for pre-existing conditions. The carve-outs are not what you're talking about. You're misleading Georgia.
It's not idle words, it's people's health.
Excuse me, are you done yet? Can I finish?
Please, both of you, let's settle down.
I was the one interrupted. Thank you, Mike. The issue here is credibility and judgment. And we are trying to protect the people of Georgia from something that has really devastated them in terms of health care costs. In the middle of this pandemic, they're calling us, accusing us of the ones wanting to take away the insurance. They've already limited that to so many people in Georgia, and that's one of the problems. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Let's go to Edan Schultz with WCTV for the next question.
This question is for Mr. Ossoff. You've said you'd like to expand tuition-free higher education programs. It's not going to be cheap. How are you going to pay for those kind of programs without raising taxes on working-class Americans?
Well, thank you for the question. And what I've said is I want to make sure that tuition at public colleges and historically black colleges and universities is 100% free of debt. Not free tuition, but debt-free tuition. You should not have to take on a penny of debt to get a degree from a public college in this country. You know, both of my parents were the first in their families to graduate college. And the fact that they were able to go and get that education without taking on decades of debt is why they were able to start businesses and invest in their futures and invest in my future and give me the opportunities that I've had. But that ladder to opportunity has been ripped out for so many American families. The cost of education in this country is a scandal. That's why what I support is expanding the Pell Grant program so that tuition to a public college or an HBCU doesn't require anybody in this country to take on any debt. Then people can come out of school and pursue their dreams instead of paying down debt for decades. I want to expand the Pell Grant program. Senator Perdue wants to do away with it. Senator Perdue supported abolishing the Department of Education entirely, which runs the Pell Grant program. He doesn't care about the interests of ordinary working people and their ability to afford education. He wanted to abolish the Department of Education and the Pell Grant program.
That is your time. Senator Perdue, would you like 45
Well,
seconds?
as usual, when you ask a Democrat how they're going to pay for anything, they do everything but tell you how they're going to pay for it. Let me tell you how they're going to pay for it. They're going to tax you, and they're going to tax you at a rate we've never seen before, and here's why. Because that little thing they're talking about is part of the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is supposed to be this great thing about climate change and so forth. Only 20% of the Green New Deal has anything to do with climate change. This is in there. And the Green New Deal would cost every American family $65,000. They have no way to pay for that. You can't tax enough to do that. And yet this is the dream of AOC and Hillary and all the rest of the liberal side of the Democratic Party to take us down a road to bankruptcy. We've got to get serious about our debt. We can talk about that in another question, but right now this is the road you cannot go down to let them spend
That is your
what
time,
they're
Senator
talking about
Perdue.
spending.
Mr. Ossoff?
Well, Senator, what I'm talking about is expanding the Pell Grant program that you want to abolish. The Pell Grant program. Do you know how many families in this state rely upon the Pell Grant program to afford higher education? You've got these sort of dark conspiracies about this agenda, which is about expanding opportunity by expanding the Pell Grant program, Senator. You supported abolishing the Department of Education, and you won't own up to it, just like you still refuse to acknowledge that even in the middle of this pandemic, you are working to rip health care away from the very people you represent by repealing protections for pre-existing conditions. Another opportunity, sir, to own your record on health care if you're willing.
Mike?
Senator Perdue?
Again, he projects over here what they're doing. He will not tell you how they're going to pay for it. Pell Grant, free education, it doesn't matter. I worked my way through a public school. My boys graduated from public high school. This is a serious issue that we got to deal with. But and who's going to determine who gets debt-free and who doesn't? The kid that's working their way through college versus the one that's got a new BMW? I'm sorry, but I don't want Democrats making those decisions. We want everybody to have access to quality education. That's why school choice in the K through 12 area is one that I'm very, very positive on. And yet these guys are fighting it at every turn.
Very quickly, Mr. Ossoff.
Sure. I mean, have you noticed it's always these guys, the Democrats? It's always this partisan invective. Team blue versus team red. I'm proposing something very straightforward and widely popular. Expand the Pell Grant program to make college affordable for working families in this state. Senator Perdue couldn't care less whether Georgia families can afford the college they need. This is a guy who sells meetings on a private island for corporate PAC checks. This is a guy who voted 4 times to repeal protections for pre-existing conditions. And notice he still refuses to account for those votes. He will not acknowledge that he is continuing to support a policy to repeal protections for pre-existing conditions in the middle of a pandemic.
I get one short response to that.
Very short, because we got a lot of questions to go through.
I understand that. Well, here again, he's prevaricating. He told us one thing. He said, oh no, I would never take corporate money, but it's in a public legal filing where he filed that he took corporate money. So this better than now attitude is just getting to the end of patience. But the other thing is, what the real issue is, he hasn't come clean with China, corporate money, what he wants to really do with the Second Amendment, or opportunity zones, or HBCUs, or justice reform. These are the things that people care about that we've just gotten done. He's doing everything he can to sweep the conversation away from those things.
I can't let that stand.
Very quickly, and we'll button this up and then we're moving on to the next question.
I just heard a laundry list of accusations, but not one word about health care. This is very straightforward. We are in the middle of a grave public health crisis. It is spiraling out of control because Washington politicians downplayed the crisis, ignored the medical science, undermined the doctors and scientists who knew what they're doing. And Senator David Perdue, in the middle of this health crisis, is still supporting efforts to repeal protections for Georgians with pre-existing conditions. Listen, everybody out there watching at home, you need to know if he has his way, insurance companies will be able to deny you coverage because you've got heart disease or diabetes or you've recovered from cancer.
That is your time, Mr. Ossoff.
I
Let's
have
move
to
on.
respond. He called my name in there. I have to get to in just a minute.
Very quickly.
Thank you, Mike. Let's talk about who's threatening what. If you move to socialized medicine, guess who determines who gets surgeries, who and how long you have to wait, and what doctor you have to use? The federal government. That's the way it is in Canada and most of Europe. That's what they're proposing. The costs are astronomical. They cannot pay for socialized medicine and the Green New Deal. It would bankrupt America. We're already in trouble from a debt standpoint. I ran on that. We lowered the debt curve by growing the economy. But right now, we've got to get serious about beating COVID and then getting our economy going again. If you leave it to the Democrats, they want us locked down and continue to stay locked down until sometime in the future.
Let's move on to the next question. Let's go to Dawn Baker with WTOC.
This question is for Senator Perdue. When you won the Senate seat, you labeled yourself a deficit hawk. In the past few years under President Trump and the Republican-controlled U.S. Senate, the deficit has increased dramatically, including a huge tax cut primarily for the wealthiest Americans. Have your concerns changed at all about the deficit?
Not at all, Don. Thank you for the question and the clarification. First of all, the tax cut, point of clarification, was not for the rich. The people who benefited the most from it, from this economic revival we had, are the poorest in our country. Under 8 years of Barack Obama and their great economic profile, their agenda, 800,000 people fell into poverty. With this agenda that we've put in place, working on regulations and energy and taxes and Dodd-Frank, we got the economy going, and the people that benefited the most were at the bottom of the economic ladder. We helped 6.5 million people pull themselves out of poverty. Now, the debt is a problem, and we have to work on that, but the first thing you have to do is grow the economy. What these guys want to do, and after Barack Obama doubled all preceding debt of all other presidents, this president had increased debt dramatic. We had increased debt somewhat, but the big dramatic increase is coming behind the COVID relief. And the president made the right decision, and we backed him up to bring COVID relief, $47 billion. Jon Ossoff won't talk about that. He won't talk about the relief that's actually been brought to the state in terms of hospitals and schools and communities and small businesses because he opposed it. If he'd been in the Senate, he would have voted against this extension for more PPP help because he opposed it in the first place.
Mr. Ossoff, you have 45 seconds.
No, actually, let's talk about the national debt, Senator. You ran your entire first campaign on bringing down the national debt, even before COVID. After 6 years in the Senate majority, our national debt increased by $5 trillion on your watch. On your watch. Those were your policies, sir. And talking about bringing resources home to Georgia for our hospitals, 9 rural hospitals have closed in this state in the last 10 years. And Senator Perdue continues to oppose accepting Medicaid expansion. Georgians are already paying their federal taxes into the Medicaid program. You're letting that money go to other states instead of sustaining our rural hospitals. David Perdue does not care about our health. He only cares about his donors.
That is your time, Senator Perdue.
Well, thank you. Again, in talking about the debt, let's get the facts right. It was about $3 trillion. And that's the momentum that was carried after the last administration. We got the economy going. We actually lowered the debt curve by about $2 trillion over the next decade. They never talk about that. That's a fact. It's not opinion. Under COVID, we made a tough decision that whatever was necessary to get people the help. The Democrats voted with us on part of it, but right now, to get the rest of it, they're playing partisan politics. And that's what's choking the life out of our economy right now, that and the Democrat-run states blocking the economy. This is what I'm talking about. He will say and do anything to hide this radical socialist agenda. The number one thing that will bankrupt us is the Green New Deal and socialized medicine, which he supports.
Mr. Ossoff, 45 seconds.
There's the senator with the catchphrases again, but no substance, little truth, and no sense of personal responsibility. Where is the relief, Senator? The PPP small business lending program expired in August. Extended unemployment insurance expired in August. Where is the relief? You were on vacation for a month while all that happened. In fact, Senator Perdue was leading the charge to cut unemployment insurance in the middle of a pandemic after millions of Georgians had been forced out of work by a virus that he had told us would have little impact on economic growth. Where is the relief, Senator? Can you do anything but blame the Democrats?
I absolutely can. Can I give a response? Well, let's talk about the relief, John. By bringing the relief to Georgia, we saved 1.5 million jobs, something you wouldn't know about. You've never created a real job in America. You don't know what's involved in creating a job and keeping it. We put money in the hands of the smallest businesses out here in America. The average loan size in Georgia is about $100,000. The average employment per recipient is about 10. I'm telling you, this was a life-saving exercise, and what's being held up right now is being held up by the Democrats. We are totally ready to put this bill on the floor and fund another couple $100 billion to get this done. They're holding it up because they want state relief for California and New York. They want bailout relief for their irresponsible retirement liabilities that they built.
That is your time, Senator Perdue. Let's move on to our next question. Let's go to Richard Rogers with WRDW out of Augusta, Georgia.
Good evening from Augusta. Thanks very much. Let's talk about cybersecurity. It's a very big deal for Georgia and certainly for Augusta, too. It is strong here. We know it has a national impact. But there are concerns about hacking and outside interference from foreign governments, businesses being held hostage by ransomware attacks. How would you make sure the U.S. has the strongest cyber defense possible?
Mr. Ossoff, 1:15 to you.
Well, this is a vital issue, and particularly with elections upcoming, there is widespread and understandable concern about whether or not our infrastructure, our country's technical infrastructure, is resilient enough. And we face significant cyber threats from abroad and also from non-state actors. And we need to take every step necessary to ensure that the United States government, vital federal agencies, state governments, and American enterprise are not vulnerable to intrusion by foreign intelligence services, foreign governments, or hackers. It's absolutely essential.
Mr. Perdue.
Wow, that was the shortest answer yet. We're talking about the military. Go figure that. Certainly answer the question. That is a great question. It's one of the top threats we have in our country today. 5 threats across 5 domains. Thanks to the last Democratic administration, when they cut military spending by 25%, they left the world more dangerous than any time in our lifetime. We have now brought the Army Cyber Headquarters to Augusta, Georgia, to Fort Gordon. This is just the beginning. We're going to stand up to China and Russia and other nefarious players behind cyber. But we can't do it if the Democrats come along again and defund the military like they want to defund the police. If they're like the last 2 Democratic presidents, they'll cut military spending. He even supports a plan that would cut and close 2 bases in the state of Georgia. I'm telling you, this is what
that is your time, Senator Perdue. Mr. Ossoff?
It is absolute nonsense. I will stand up and fight for Georgia's military bases. And you're lying through your teeth, Senator. Just like you've been lying all night about your record. Healthcare, the pandemic. Did you or did you not tell us that this virus would be no deadlier than the flu? Did you or did you not tell us that the risk to economic growth was little? Did you or did you not tell us there would be no significant uptick in cases? Those are your exact words. There would be no significant uptick in cases. The senator's words. Did you or did you not vote 4 times to repeal protections for pre-existing conditions? Will you deflect or will you answer yes or no?
Senator Perdue?
I get to. First of all, when you're talking about military bases, did you or did you not, John, support a plan called the Joint Basing Plan to close 2 bases in Georgia?
I did not. It would have had 0 impact on Georgia bases, and you know it, Senator.
Excuse me, and I'll finish my question. I think you see what's going on here. He pivots
I'm answering the
that.
question.
Well, would you let Senator Perdue finish first?
Thank you, Mike. This is what we get, guys. This is what you call swamp in Washington. I'm telling you, as an outsider, this is what would drive you crazy right here. They won't talk about the issue. The issue was military. Started with cyber, moved to military, and now he's off on everything else. The issue is, go back and look at the record in 2017. He ran on the Joint Basing Plan. It's in the record.
That is your time. Let's move on to our next question. Let's go back to Richard Rogers with WRDW out of Augusta, Georgia.
Thanks very much. My last question of the evening is simply this. I think voters on both sides will agree on this. They are ready for this campaign to end. The negativity on television has been unbelievable. Are there any false claims, gentlemen, you would like to clear up right now?
Senator Perdue, let's start with you.
We don't have enough time. They've outspent us dramatically because of the billionaires in California and New York. He raised a lot of money, $23 million in the 3rd quarter. 90% of that came from outside the state of Georgia. Now, who's trying to come into the state and manipulate our election? It's people outside the state who support Jon Ossoff. Well, who are they? They want this radical socialist agenda. They're trying to keep you from talking about that, but that's what's at play. And that's why they don't want to talk about it. I really think the number one thing is when he talks about health care and he talks about the vote on Obamacare and all that. That is totally misleading. The same thing for the COVID crisis. He took a statement that had a sentence and he took a phrase out of that sentence and then said that was all I said. What we then said was on the COVID crisis was we need to take it seriously. And right after that, we get to work on CARES and brought $47 billion to the state of Georgia, which is almost twice the size of the state budget. The other is this stock trade nonsense. He keeps hammering that even though he knows it's in the public record that that's been totally refuted. Sorry.
Mr. Ossoff, a minute 15 to you.
Well, perhaps Senator Perdue would have been able to respond properly to the COVID-19 pandemic if you hadn't been fending off multiple federal investigations for insider trading. It's not just that you're a crook, Senator. It's that you're attacking the health of the people that you represent. You did say COVID-19 was no deadlier than the flu. You did say there would be no significant uptick in cases. All the while, you were looking after your own assets and your own portfolio, and you did vote 4 times to end protections for pre-existing conditions. 4 times. And the legislation that you tout, the PROTECT Act, it includes loopholes that specifically allow insurance companies to deny policies to Georgians with pre-existing conditions. Can you look down the camera and tell the people of this state why you voted 4 times to allow insurance companies to deny us health coverage because we may suffer from diabetes or heart disease or asthma or have cancer in remission? Why, Senator?
Senator Perdue?
I voted against the Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare, because it was taking insurance away from millions of Georgians. Today, almost 18% of Georgians don't have any health insurance because of the Affordable Care Act. The next thing is, this is exactly what I'm talking about. He'll talk about anything except his own accountability and his own responsibility. He still hadn't owned up to the China accusation, which is in the public record. The thing I'm most upset about, though, is that he'll say and do anything to my friends in Georgia to mislead them about how radical and socialist this agenda
That is your
really
time,
is.
Senator Perdue. Right now, we are getting to the close of the show. We only have 4 minutes left, and we promised that we would give each of you a minute 30 for a closing statement. Mr. Ossoff, we'll begin with you, and Senator Perdue, you will have the last word.
Well, let me just first express my gratitude to the station for hosting us, and my gratitude to everybody tuned in at home for bearing this election season. It is so important that we make a plan to vote, with early voting ending in Georgia on Friday, because our health is on the line. We deserve so much better than we're getting from our government right now. My mother immigrated to this country when she was 23 as a young woman because she believed in America. She believed that we would have leaders who brought us together instead of driving us apart. She believed that this journey that this country is on toward progress, toward a more perfect union, was beautiful, and she wanted to be a part of it. But what's happened to our country in this last year has broken my mother's heart. Our country has been ravaged by a virus that our politicians told us not to worry about. This virus continues to spread uncontrolled across the United States. Hospitalizations are climbing. Deaths are climbing. Our political leaders have demonstrated that they are not up to the task. This is not about political party. He'll give a speech in a moment about Democrats and blaming the Democrats for this and that. This isn't about party. This is about whether we have competent people who will put public health experts in charge to save hundreds of thousands of lives over the next 6 months and safeguard health care and health insurance for ordinary people during this crisis.
Mr. Ossoff, that is your time. Let's go to Senator Perdue with a minute 30.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you to WTOC and Mike for moderating this tonight. Folks, this race is bigger than me. It's bigger than Jon Ossoff. It's about the future direction of our country. And make no mistake that the radical, extremist, socialist part of the Democratic Party is in charge. And Jon Ossoff, no matter what he says about individual, will be an absolute rubber stamp for Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi as they perpetrate this outrageous and dangerous agenda on our country. Don't let him fool you. How many Democrats voted for Amy Coney Barrett on Monday night this week? 0. Why? Because Chuck Schumer got him in line, and that's exactly what he would do with Jon Ossoff. This race is too important for that. You folks know Bonnie and me. You know how I will vote. You know what I've accomplished. But there's so much more work to do. We've got to defeat this COVID virus. And we've got to do it sensibly and get it back, get our economy back, and get our schools back open, get life back to normal again, but do it safely and responsibly. That's why I'm running for re-election, and I would really appreciate your vote.
Well, I want to thank you both for joining us here in our WTOC studio. As we said, this has been broadcast throughout the state of Georgia. We also want to thank our panel of journalists who joined us tonight. Edan Schultz with WCTV, Barbara Gauthier with WTVM, Jim Wallace with WALB, Richard Rogers with WRDW, and Dawn Baker with WTOC. Of course, I want to thank our viewers for joining us tonight as well in Savannah, Augusta, Columbus, Albany, and Thomasville, and places few and far between those areas. Remember, Election Day is on Tuesday. Early voting will end this Friday, and any absentee ballots must be received by your elections office by 7 p.m. Tuesday to be counted. Make sure you get out and vote. I'm Mike Cihla. Have a good night.